Hi, everyone. Welcome to our road session in partnership with the Aspen Institute and Rural LISC, the Rural LISC seminar today. My name is Justin Fernando, and I use he, him, his pronouns. I work for LISC as the Senior Director for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice. Our topic for our Rural Opportunity and Development session, or ROADS in short, today, as you see on the screen, is shared prosperity, building power towards an equitable rural economy. Today's event partners include the Aspen Institute, the San Francisco Federal Reserve, A Better Chance, A Better Community, or ABC2, California Coalition for Rural Housing, Rural Forward North Carolina, and Rural LISC. Next slide, please. Racial justice and equity is a fundamental part of strong, healthy, and economically diverse rural communities, according to an April 2021 research conducted by the Federal Reserve of San Francisco. Labor market disparities by gender and race cost the US $2.6 trillion in lost GDP in 2019 alone. So assuming that racial inequities continue, costs are expected to grow from 2.6 to 3.1 trillion every year, starting in 2029. The economic cost of persistent inequities over the past 30 years adds up to 70.8 trillion in lost national output since 1990 until today. To put this 30-year loss in perspective, this is nearly 4 times the 2020 annual US GDP and 17 times greater than the global GDP loss during this COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. As a country, we have about $3 trillion to gain annually should we pursue a racial equity agenda. This is larger than the economies of the UK, India, France, Italy, Germany, and Canada, as you can see comparisons on the screen. We lose more than a country's worth of wealth due to racial wealth, health, and opportunity gaps. What all of these tell us is, and let me be very clear, we lose a lot as a society if we allow inequities to continue. And the flip side of that same coin is there are significant economic gains from racial and gender equity. Equity is not only the right thing to do, but it's absolutely necessary for our shared economic prosperity. Next slide, please. Through our featured speakers in this road sessions, we'll review how government, private sector, and civic institutions have worked to achieve greater racial equity for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and multiracial communities. We'll hear stories of innovations in racial equity and justice from national and rural practitioners on building power and cultivating BIPOC leaders. Building BIPOC leaders as talent and transforming internal organizational workplace cultures towards justice are both necessary if we're to genuinely bridge racial and gender disparities in the many years to come. So to tell you a little bit about our format, we have a panel discussion for an hour, and then we'll segue on to voluntary breakout rooms for 30 minutes. Next slide, please. To engage with us, please use the chat box to share your insights, or if you have a comment, please use the Q&A box if you want to ask a question. The last 15 minutes of our panel is going to be a Q&A. You'll also have the opportunity to engage in the 30-minute breakout more directly. You can also follow our respective groups, as you can see here on the screen, on social media through LinkedIn, Twitter, and directly share your insights using those hashtags, hashtag rural innovation, hashtag road session, hashtag rural prosperity. At 20:30 Eastern or 9:30 Pacific, you can enter the breakout session by clicking on the special Zoom link found in this Zoom chat box and the email sent to you today. If you haven't received the link ahead of time, we're going to resend those links in the next hour. We're also going to be recording this session, specifically this first hour we're in right now. It'll be available on the Aspen Communication Strategy Group event webpage, and it'll be sent to everyone who registered. So let's get started. On behalf of Rural LISC, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice, and everyone in the workshop today, I'm very proud to announce to you Bonita Robertson Hardy, the Associate Director of the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, who's going to be serving as our moderator today. Bonita, welcome to today's road session.
Thank you so much, Justin, and thank you for that warm introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. As we all know, building power within communities is a critical component to a strong, healthy, economically vibrant, and diverse rural community and region. Today, we're going to hear from speakers from across the US on how they are doing this within their communities, how they are talking about power building, and some tools and strategies which can be used within other rural places and communities. Today, we're going to start by getting some context on what's happening in our economy. And to provide that context is going to be Bina Patel-Shamali, Research Manager for the Community Development at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And then we're going to dive deep into some practitioner stories to hear from people in the field, including Chester Williams, Chief Executive Officer of A Better Chance, A Better Community, as well as Calvin Allen, who's the Senior Program Officer at MDC Rural Forward. So we're going to hear some North Carolina stories, and then we're going to go out west. So we're going to hear from Gisela Salgado, Director of Leadership Development Programs for the California Coalition for Rural Housing. So as you can tell, we got a great lineup of speakers to share on some of the work that they're doing and how they're doing this across the country. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So to provide some context, I welcome Bina to our virtual platform, and she's going to share a little bit about what's missing out, what we're missing out on as an economy by having not everyone included. So Bina, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Benita. It's so great to be here this morning with you all who are really thinking creatively about the challenges facing rural communities. Today, I hope to offer a tool for your tool belt and talking about why the work that you're doing is critical to communities and also to our shared economic potential, to our economy on the whole. And I'm going to start with a disclaimer that the views I express today are my own. So as a research manager in community development, in community development, our focus at the Federal Reserve is on fostering strategic partnerships and conducting research with an aim toward identifying and removing barriers to opportunity. And at the SF Fed, overall, a touchstone for our work is what we call unreserved opportunity. And the idea there is that opportunity is not a luxury. It should be available to everyone. And our vision is for a healthy and inclusive economy where all people can participate. Anyone who wishes to benefit from and participate in the economy is able to, regardless of any demographic factors such as race or gender. So today, as mentioned, as Justin mentioned, I'm going to be highlighting a recent project that we worked on, adapting this paper that came out in the spring from the San Francisco Fed that quantified the gains from closing racial and gender gaps in the economy on a national level. We adapted this methodology for the state level. And really our aim is to provide this tool to practitioners, to you, to think about how to engage with untraditional partners and broaden the story, recognizing that often the gaps that we're working on, as you all know, are, they've been longstanding issues. They take a lot of resources, time, energy to address, but what we're often not thinking about is what we stand to gain by closing them. So this paper showed that in 2019, if gender and racial gaps in the economy were closed, the economy would be larger, our GDP would be larger by $2.6 trillion. Next slide. And what we know is that our workforce is growing increasingly diverse. And so this issue of equity really ties into the Federal Reserve's mandate for maximum employment. We know that these inequities are limiting the full potential of our economy. Next slide. And I invite you to step back for a minute and just think about the economy on the whole. The ways that we often hear the news, we think about the economy. I invite you to zoom back and think a little bit. As humans, our superpower and the reason that we've been so successful on the planet as a species is our ability to work together. And the economy is really our tool for doing that. It's the ways that we can specialize, that we can add value by working together. And as we are facing more and more critical challenges and the need to build more resilience in our economy, it's really critical that we remember that the economy is about people and that these gaps in race and gender are really holding back the resilience and potential of our economy. Next slide. So, and I just also want to contextualize these issues of equity in a rural context. As you all may be aware that in rural areas, people of color are a fast growing segment of the population. And when we think about persistent poverty in rural areas, we know that people of color have borne a disproportionate burden of persistent poverty. And in fact, just looking at disparities, if you look at the demographic groups living in poverty in rural areas, the leading group is Black rural poverty is the highest, followed by American Indian poverty, followed by Hispanic poverty. So we know that these issues are persistent in rural areas, and that as our panelists are going to talk about, building leadership amongst these groups is really critical for addressing these gaps. So starting with this idea, this simulation. So I invite you to visit this website, fedcommunities.org/close-the-gaps. And on this page, you'll see a data simulation, next slide, that represents this thought experiment. How much could US states gain by closing racial and gender gaps in the labor market? So you can choose from all 50 states and Washington, DC, and see what the GDP of each state how much bigger it would be if we had closed racial and gender gaps. And this is using data from the last 15 years, but it's on an annualized basis. So when I look here, actually, before I talk about that, how did we do this? The way that we did this, if you click open the next slide, we looked at 4 key labor market measures: average hourly earnings, employment to population ratio, average hours worked per week, and educational attainment. And for each state, we simulated the impact of closing existing race ethnicity gaps, which by shorthand, we've been using race, gender gaps, and the combination of race, ethnicity, and gender gaps, recognizing that the combination of these factors is its own important aspect to measure. So we looked at each of these measures separately and then all together. And basically, by accounting for the fact that the group that's benefited from the greatest structural supports to the economy has been white men. And that's why we've seen persistent high numbers in these labor market outcomes. We've raised the floor for each of these groups to that of white men and calculated what the GDP would be broadly. Next slide. So if you look here, you can see for Nevada that if we closed race and gender gaps, our economy in Nevada would be $2.1 billion larger. And this is from a simulated baseline GDP of $52 billion. So this represents quite a large share of GDP. Next slide. So, and then you can look at each of these labor market measures separately, and the same thing holds where you can, if we were to close those racial and gender gaps, we would see, just in earnings, we would see $12 billion larger economy in Nevada. So it's important to note when we're thinking about this simulation that these gaps are a result of historical and current policies and practices. It's really, our dominant framework and narrative around these issues is if we work hard enough that we will get ahead. And what you all know is that there are structural factors that enable opportunity for some and make it challenging for others. And this is a legacy of longstanding policies in the past, a longstanding legacy of policies in the past, as well as things that are happening more recently. So we need to recognize that this goes beyond individual behavior and choice and think about what are the things in the economy that support people to participate and what are the things that make it difficult and how does this change on the basis of race and gender. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, I invite you to explore the simulation for your state. Check out our detailed methods and also check out our frequently asked questions. And you are able to, from this page, you can download the data, you can download each profile by state, you can share it. And our goal with this is really to broaden the sphere of the conversation, to engage unlikely partners in thinking about what it takes to create economic opportunity. And also, not on this slide, but at the SF Fed site, we have a prime equity visit, and I think that link will appear in the chat as well. Next slide. So I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts for all of us to be asking this question: what do we stand to gain? And that is really the point of this tool and simulation. So I hope that you'll see this as a tool in your tool belt, something that you can share and broaden the conversation of why these issues matter to our economy. Next slide. And I always like to end with this question, you know, our systems are made up of people, and all of us have a role in creating a healthy, inclusive economy. So I want you to leave this session after hearing from the other panelists. What is your role? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bina. So I'm going to, based on your presentation, I have one question for you. And remember, everyone will have some time at the end for some questions and answers from the audience. But based on the information that you provided, how do you think this translates to change in communities of color? Like how does this really translate on the local level?
Yeah, so I think as we'll hear from other folks, the session today is about power and building power. And I think in order to see the change that we'd like to see in communities, we all have to acknowledge power on multiple levels, starting with our own individual accounting of our identities and where they give us power and leverage in our conversations, our interpersonal conversations, thinking about our institutional roles and the voice that creates for us. And then thinking about how we extend that voice to those who have not had it in the past, and really thinking about ways to set the table differently to enable participation from community members, to really value the lived experience and understand that, you know, over time you know, we're trained in certain ways of thinking and viewing the world that we have our own blind spots, and we really need to be hearing from communities and enabling communities to catalyze change that matters the most to them. So we hope that this tool is really just a way to start the conversation. But as I said, the racial equity primer that I linked to also offers some ways that people can really think about all the dimensions. You know, we're multidimensional people, that we have multiple dimensions to our identities, and to start thinking for ourselves about where are the places that we can be leveraging our power to create these changes, because we are in it together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bina. And I've heard it said many times that, you know, we have to set our own table, right? And start setting our own tables. And so now we're going to turn it over to hear from some voices from and practitioners from North Carolina. And so Chester, I welcome you to come on screen and have a conversation with us about what's going on. What are you doing at A Better Chance in a Better Community? And how are you thinking about this work? How are you thinking about power building within your communities?
As she said, I'm Chester Williams with A Better Chance, A Better Community, located in Enfield, North Carolina, which is in northeastern North Carolina, and a predominantly rural area. And with ABC2, we're working with young people throughout the communities to activate their power, to have a voice in community change in so many ways. Because young people are an untapped resource, but they also bring a level of brilliancy and innovation to the table. So today in our presentation with Calvin, you're going to hear more about what that power look like for populations or marginalized communities to build power to come together across county lines, but also looking at the community power that comes with that.
Perfect. Thank you, Chester. And so, Calvin, I am going to turn it over to you and Chester. Y'all are going to do some dialogue with me. And Calvin, I know you have some slides and you're going to talk about the work that you and Chester are both doing, the work that you're doing at MDC Rural Forward, and how you and Chester have worked together. So take it away.
Thanks, Benita, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to get through some context so that we can have the real conversation moving forward. Rural Forward is a program of MDC, and it is part of another statewide initiative called Healthy Places North Carolina. Next slide. And the goal of Healthy Places North Carolina is to see the major health indicators in 10 rural counties in North Carolina improve over a 10-year period. It was started by the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust in 2012, and there'll be $100 million invested in this program over time. But you can see there kind of the main goals being, number one, let's identify and build relationships with local leaders. There's no need to kind of build some brand new model. There are already local leaders who are trying to make their communities healthier and more thriving. Let's identify those folks. Let's support them. Let's help them do what they do even better. Part of this work is asset mapping. And so identifying those local innovation strategies towards a healthier community. And healthier, of course, includes the social determinants of health, not just health, but education, economy, community safety, all kinds of things that help promote healthier communities. And then, of course, amplify what they're doing to a countywide level. One of the things that we always give Nick Aceves credit, that he was a community partner in Rockingham County, and he's like, I get what we're talking about now, that everybody could be doing their jobs, working to do their jobs better, and the county still might not be improving. That it's not just about doing what we're already doing better, but it's making sure that we're aligned, that we're actually working towards the same goals to make our community healthier and more thriving. Next slide. And so kind of about a few years into the work of Healthy Places North Carolina, the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust recognized that they needed a capacity building arm to help support local leaders. And when we're saying leaders, we're talking about individuals, organizations, and networks. And so they helped create Rural Forward in 2014. And we do a number of the things that you see listed there. A lot of people know us for helping local groups do strategic planning, and our services are free for the folks in those 10 counties. Facilitation, coaching, linking them with necessary resources, policy support, a little bit of research and evaluation, some training and connecting, back office support when folks need help kind of working on budgets and those kinds of things. And then something we call Beyond Local for Local, which is this idea that most of the work that we're doing is focused on the particular counties where we work, and kind of helping build the leadership from within. But every now and then there are resources outside of the county that are useful and helpful for local leaders. And so there are things beyond the local context that are helpful for the local context. And so, for example, the presentation that Bina just gave, that information about the impact of race and gender inequity on the job market, is one of the things. We actually had an opportunity to be a part of a research study as well that looked at that impact in North Carolina, and figuring out that we would be $5.2 billion stronger if the racial and gender gaps were closed in North Carolina. And we were able to kind of push, when that research happened, to not just look at the major metropolitan areas, but instead in North Carolina, they focused on the rural areas instead. And we were able to have our local partners be part of those local conversations that happened around that research. So that's an idea. That's the idea behind Beyond Local for Local. And then again, you see kind of our big goals, which are identifying those leaders, strengthening their skills, and then connecting them to each other and to other resources. Next slide. So a couple of things that we've learned kind of along the way, I think for us as part of this larger initiative and being tied to a major foundation, when it comes down to it, and Bina already just spoke to this very well, that all of this is about power building, that the reason that we are doing this work to begin with is that there is some inequity in power and resources that exists in community. That is why we exist. And so it's been interesting as we've done this work, and sometimes we'll ask folks like, how much power do you feel that you have? Or what's your power in relation to kind of other major factors kind of in the area? And even saying that word is really hard for some folks, whether they are BIPOC leaders or white leaders or mainstream leaders as well, that we don't talk about power often. So that's one of the things that we try to do, is to show that we can have that conversation and we can be okay. Next. The other thing is that in order to have greater equity, that we have to deal with power kind of on all three levels, that we're talking about individuals, we're talking about groups, and we're talking about the systems as well, and the major networks. Next slide. And so I'm sure most people know this, but this is just another visual representation of this, that we're talking about access overall. And that just because I lack power in one area doesn't mean that I don't have it in another area. And really helping our local leaders to identify, maybe you don't have systemic power right now. Do you have the personal power? What are the things that we can do to build that personal power? Or maybe you are kind of isolated, which is a particular issue in rural areas, of course. So then maybe we're gathering other folks, other partners to build more group power as well, which is a major strategy that we've worked with a lot of our local leaders on. Next slide. And then again, just additional context here in terms of kind of how we think about the work, that, when you think about a mainstream, and, I think it's up to everybody to decide if there is a mainstream or not. But when you think about even what we call Main Street, it's usually the center of town. We usually center it in. Next on here is the energy is always kind of moving towards the center. And that's one of the things that we've seen, is that even for groups that are in the margins, that there is this push to always kind of move toward the mainstream. Next. And next again, yeah. And so in terms of who is there, we're talking about all these different groups that are part of communities in the margins, and that it takes a real concerted effort to not just look towards the mainstream, but to actually work together. And, we all know that is really success. That's what a lot of rural communities have kind of figured out, is that we have to work together in order to build power as well. But I don't want it to be lost that we're often having to push against this tide that is pushing us more and more towards the mainstream, and not towards kind of building our own power and support. And so a lot of the work that we're doing at Rural Forward is thinking about what is our role as a mainstream organization supporting communities in the margins. What are the things that we have to think about as well? There are a couple of other questions that come to mind as well. Next. What does that energy flow indicate? What is the relationship of each of the groups to the mainstream? Some folks see themselves as communities in the margins, and some folks see themselves as more connected to the mainstream. What does that mean? And then the next as well. Also, just identifying that there is power kind of in the margins, not just in the mainstream, and kind of bringing that up as well. Next slide. So one of the next thing that that's become really clear for us is that in terms of BIPOC communities within rural as well, that because of scale in comparison to urban counterparts, that BIPOC communities can be even more isolated. The issues that come up for BIPOC leaders can be lost because there aren't the venues to share those more broadly in terms of kind of mainstream media and other things. And so it's really dependent on creating kind of these underground networks sometimes built within communities to be able to share kind of what are the issues, the things that are important. And we found that we can have a role as a mainstream partner in moving that forward. Next up there is just naming again that we are a mainstream organization, and that in order to be responsible, we have to be constantly thinking about what role are we playing. So can we help make connections with our local rural partners, and then with mainstream partners or with each other, but not make it that we are critical to maintaining those relationships, that we make the introductions, we help to strengthen them, and then we step out of the way so that those relationships are built on themselves and they don't need us, is the major point. Next. And that speaks to kind of trying not to be a gatekeeper, and also recognizing that just the way that constant energy pull towards the mainstream, that in terms of our work, it gets really easy to just address mainstream concerns rather than our partners who are working in the margins, and to be constantly aware of that and to speaking to each other about that. Again, just kind of defining what we're talking about. And next slide. And so kind of towards this work, one of our major partners has been Chester Williams, who's been a trusted partner and friend for several years. The yellow arrow points to where Chester lives in Halifax County, and wanted to just kind of name that one of the Beyond Local for Local opportunities was that there's some food systems work that was happening in Beaufort County, where the blue arrow is. And we made an intentional decision to invite Chester to be a part of those conversations with the permission of the local leaders in Beaufort County. And Chester can speak a little bit more to that directly.
Thank you, Calvin, for that introduction and that segue. As in terms of connecting ABC2 with the Beaufort County Hill, we found that was very important because both of our counties was Healthy Places, North Carolina, identified to look at overall health outcomes and improving the quality of life. And as Calvin mentioned earlier about the dynamics of individual, organization, and community power, as he was connecting us to the work that was happening there, it was also building our capacity and building our understanding that communities have no boundaries, and have an understanding myself working with me as an individual, understanding my vision and my individual power and how does that influence how the work of my organization ABC2 move forward and it connected in this space. So as it was helping Beaufort County, it was helping me out a lot to understand my role as a connector, but also understanding the role that other organizations look at how to engage young people in this work. So one thing that I found very beautiful about this exchange was building intentional relationships. So it wasn't our ABC2 coming in to tell, oh, we have the answer to the question, but actually embracing the process where Beaufort is, but also take a step back, look at the process that I have experienced in Halifax and finding those similarities. And sharing and celebrating that we have these things in common, but then also looking at the differences and learning from those, we call them challenges, but I like to call them opportunities, that we was able to share understanding about that there are some very opportunities and challenges in Halifax. It's very similar to where Beaufort County is. And even though they was in different levels in the Healthy Places, North Carolina, but there was some lessons learned from Halifax that I was able to share with Beaufort County. And there was some exciting things that was taking place with Beaufort County that I was able to take back to Halifax. Another thing that we participated in was the Center for Creative Leadership Training that I thought was phenomenal because it took away the place or the geographical location of where we are and really looking at ourselves as individuals and defining roles in this work as in terms of the food system, looking at the food system for what it is, how it can support the community and raising those voices. And as Calvin talked about the mainstream and margin, it was amazing at the table that we all represented either one or other, but we understand where the power lie can sometimes look different from different perspective. Yeah. Another thing was working together to plan an event called The Gathering. That was very interesting. At times, I always consider myself an outsider, but the Beaufort County people always remind me that, no, you're not an outsider, you are a part of the family. And that's one of the things that's part of our culture. As we begin to talk about regional conversation is that a lot of our values and beliefs are very similar. Yeah. We want to get to the table, want to have conversation. We do find that food is a common theory for us, or music is a common theory, but we now learning that this power, this leadership that we did tap in before, but just having simple conversations and understanding that we all have the same passion, we all have the same goals, but how do we find our roles and niche to make it happen? And what does that power dynamics look like?
That is perfect. Chester, that's a perfect segue because I think, I'm a Southern girl, so I love food, and breaking bread and having a conversation makes a huge difference. And we know that. And one of the things that I will remind people of is that we're going to have individual breakouts at the end of this so that everyone can ask individual questions to Chester and to Calvin about some of the work that they've done and a lot of the work that they've done specifically around regionalism. And I saw the note in the chat about food, and yes, now I'm getting hungry. But I am going to I'm going to welcome people to join the individual breakouts to learn more, and then I'm going to thank Chester and Calvin for sharing some of the work that they're doing in North Carolina. And I am going to turn it over to Gisela Salgado, who is the Director of Leadership Development Programs at the California Coalition for Rural Housing. Gisela, let's talk a little bit about the work that you have been involved in for many years. And I know you're also doing some work with youth and young people.
Yes, great. Well, first of all, I want to say that I have much appreciation for the work that Kelvin and Chester are doing. Great. I'd love to also learn more moving forward. Again, my name is Gisela Salgado. I am with the California Coalition for Rural Housing, and we are a coalition of nonprofit housing developers in rural California. We have about 35 active members who are building and preserving affordable housing, again, in rural areas. And we have been operating an internship program for the last 23 years that intentionally, and the mission is really to seek out and recruit students of color that come from the very same rural communities that our nonprofit members are working with. And why is that? Actually, Vina and Bonita have talked about this, have already talked about the fact that we are one of the states with the largest diversity. We're becoming a widely diverse state. There's no minority majority, or into the future, there's going to be no minority majority. And in rural areas is the same way. And so our nonprofit members recognized that it is important to have those voices from the very same communities that we're serving, BIPOC, who have lived experience with the lack of affordable housing, with how that affects really so many other things in our lives, whether that may be health, opportunity to succeed, to thrive in life. And so housing is so critical and such an important foundation in people's lives, right? So this is really an opportunity, creating space, the space to bring people of color into the field and be part of this field, to play a role, to become leaders and impact a sector, an industry that widely affects making affordable housing available in rural communities. So we've been running the program, like I said, for the last 23 years, and it's very specific in terms of that it's very structured, and it really trains BIPOC in affordable housing development, real estate development, which is one of the most niche and technical aspects of community housing, especially in affordable housing development. We see people of color represented in other areas of our industry, such as community services or asset management. But affordable housing development continues to be predominantly white, male dominated. And it is a niche where, again, we need those voices. We need representation and leaders that understand really what is like and why this is so important, and to really bring those perspectives into the table when we're thinking about where we're building, who we're building for, how to create a space to ensure that, again, folks are thriving in rural areas. So for the last 24 years of running the program, we have recruited about 200 students into the program. Of those students, half of them are still in the affordable housing sector, working in rural communities. We have stories of interns who have been in the industry now as professionals for, say, 10 to 15 years. I'm actually one of those students. I graduated from the internship program myself. And some of those students are now the ones leading multifamily housing projects, building affordable housing for farm workers and other populations in need. So yes, thank you for sharing the photos. And it is a one-year program. So we run this program every year. It is for 12 months. We recruit students from local four-year universities and also community colleges, because oftentimes, and I think most folks are aware, that the closest academic institution to a nonprofit organization in a rural area may be a community college. So we recruit students from different universities, different community colleges. And now that, unfortunately, we have been in this pandemic for the last I can't even remember the time. I think it's been 2-3 years, right? I think we all have learned that we can definitely work remotely from pretty much any location, as long as you have the technology to be able to do so. And that also opens up the doors to be able to recruit folks who maybe even in more remote areas and maybe engage in some kind of remote distance learning with some kind of academic institution that can still work with these nonprofit organizations in their local regions or in their local jurisdictions. So again, we train the students, we bring them on, they work full-time during the summer and then part-time during the academic year. This is a paid internship because we also recognize that for a lot of the students who are coming from low-income backgrounds, rural backgrounds, some of us first-generation college students, immigrants, that oftentimes we're also supporting our families. So doing an internship without pay, I will consider that a luxury that not many of us can afford. So this internship is paid, and the nonprofits that we partner with have to be committed to the goals of the internship program, which is really to build capacity for the nonprofit sector, and at the same time provide the opportunity for the students to gain solid skills in affordable housing development, so that when they complete the internship program, they can be competitive for entry-level positions in the affordable housing sector. And so that's the reason why the internship is very structured. There is a learning plan that the California Coalition for Rural Housing discusses with the supervisor at the nonprofit organization and the intern. So that sets out and maps out the work ahead. We have 5 program competency areas that all interns are striving to achieve or gain some level of competency. And again, we provide training during the year. So at the onset of the internship program, which is typically in June of every year, we bring the interns together for 1 week of training, kind of like a boot camp in affordable housing development. And we also have other partners in the industry, professionals who have been in the industry for many years, who are in a way passing on that institutional knowledge onto this new generation of emerging leaders. And we provide technical skills training at the same time that we do leadership development skills training as well during the summer and then throughout the year that we are together in this learning space. So again, it's an opportunity and it's really the way for us to create space for those who have been marginalized for all the reasons that Vina and Bonita have described.
So Gisela, just a question around that. So you noted that you were actually a program participant in the past, and now you are working for the organization. And so how, as a program participant, what did you bring from your experiences into your current work, and how has that shaped a lot of the trajectory of the programming?
Thank you for that question. And for me, this is very personal, right? I come from an immigrant family. My grandfather and my dad actually work in the fields here in California in the Central Valley. And so I experienced firsthand a lot of the housing instability that many families experience, overcrowding housing situations, lack of habitable housing. And so for me, coming into the industry, it was just a way to be able to impact and give a voice and really be able to not only that, but be able in a way to be the conduit and also in some ways be that person that could also communicate between the institution, which is the nonprofit organizations, and the actual community. I am fluent in Spanish, and sometimes, I mean, I know that can help a lot when you are working in these communities and building trust, because that can also be oftentimes an issue. And so that to me, when I came into this program and working directly with a nonprofit housing developer, it was one of the things that I added value in, and also bringing in my own perspective, my living experience in what it meant to live in this community and what it really meant to have housing instability and to think about space and to think about location and what communities really need to thrive.
Absolutely.
And now having the program, right, and now having gone through the internship program, in my role, I can support the interns that are coming through this program because they can relate to a lot of their own personal life experience, but also to what it's like to navigate this sector or this industry as a person of color, because that has its own challenges in and of itself. So that's another piece of that.
Absolutely. I mean, and it goes to the point that you mentioned that this is still the affordable housing space is still the developer space is still majority white and male dominated. And so, you know, how are y'all talking to a lot of the students that you're through your internship programs, the young people, about going into that space and interacting in a space that is not majority minority?
And I think that's why programs like the internship program or in other programs that really are targeting or supporting BIPOC in different fields, right? It's important to create this kind of like networks. So we have that network of alumni, now a growing network of over 200 alumni who also serve as mentors to incoming interns, because that's very important to be able to connect to that and to also be able to see that you've been through this program and you also have models of where can you go, what can you do. You see yourself 2, 3, 4, 5 years into this and realize that you do learn and that you're able to continue to evolve and continue to build those leadership skills to be able to build not only affordable housing. I mean, affordable housing is very important, obviously, but also in creating other opportunities, because again, the alumni that have gone through this program become even more engaged, for example, in their local schools, in their local community, and being able to participate and be more civically engaged. So there's just so many other ways in which the students can exercise that power and influence in other areas outside of affordable housing development.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much, Stella, for sharing a little bit about your work and your experience and how y'all are impacting communities. Now I am going to ask everyone to come back on screen because we're going to do a little Q&A while everybody is coming back on screen. I also want to mention that in addition to Bina's presentation, the Federal Reserve Bank is releasing a book next month on investing in rural prosperity. And I think that that is very topical for a lot of what we're talking about, obviously. And our own Executive Director of Community Strategies Group, Janet, has a chapter in the book. A few of the few chapters have been released a little bit early, but there's also an event event launch that is planned for November 16th. And so we're going to put that link in the chat for everyone as well, so that you can have access to that. So I'm going to bring it back. We had a couple questions that came in through the chat. So thank you, everyone, and feel free to continue to add some questions. And one of those questions really was, and it was regarding Bina's presentation, but I think everyone probably has a great perspective on this around, should we just be hiring, is the problem going to be solved, right, if we just hire fewer white men? Will that add billions to our rural economies? And so, you know, what does everybody have to say about that? I mean, obviously, we know this is a multi-layered issue. This has some very much historical factors, but who wants to take a crack at answering that?
I can kick us off. Oh, go ahead, Calvin. You want to kick us off? Okay, I can kick us off. I would love to hear perspectives of others. I think this is a really important question. And I think what the goal of this narrative is to get beyond sort of pitting different groups of identities against one another, and rather thinking about how can we create conditions in our economy that allow for the participation of everyone. And the reason that it's important to focus on race in that conversation, instead of saying, well, if it's for everybody, then it's for everybody, is that we know that there have been historical policies and practices that have been disadvantaging people on the basis of race. It's the most salient, based on the data, the most salient feature of our identities. So it's important that we acknowledge that and create solutions that are acknowledging that. And also, I think the opportunity there is when we create solutions for those who've been most marginalized, it often opens the door for opportunity for everyone. So we know that people in rural communities are often, the rural community development issues are often overlooked. That there's a lot of potential in rural communities, regardless of race. And if we are creating solutions that work for people who've been most marginalized in those communities, they're likely to work best for everyone.
Great. Go ahead, Calvin. I knew you wanted to jump in on that.
No, we were thinking along the same lines as well, that for me, I think the bigger question is addressing why people of color have not had the same opportunity. And I think that's one of the pieces there that I found myself a lot these days. Kind of, we're always wanting to be asset-based and kind of how we're thinking about the work. But I think acknowledging that there is a problem, and I think one of the benefits of the tool that Bina has shared with us is that this is a way of kind of seeing that there is an impact of inequity on people's ability to have jobs and meaningful employment and economic opportunity. And so being able to kind of make that case kind of sets the stage. And then it's, seeing about how that actually applies. So you think about community development block grants, and we know that in urban areas, there's a lot more flexibility than there is in rural areas, and scale is off as well. So being able to look at kind of the policy and discrepancies and being able then to kind of address them kind of piece by piece, and seeing where the impact is more on BIPOC leaders and communities of color kind of overall.
Great. Thank y'all for that. We have another question that came in, and it's from Rosie around working in rural communities where diversity is not present, trying to help the communities become welcoming communities and encourage immigration as a growth strategy. Where do you find funding to do this work at the local level, to be inclusive, to have everyone at the table, and being compensated for being a part of planning and implementation? How are y'all doing this work? Because everybody talked a little bit about, that's in the field, about how y'all are being inclusive. How are you doing this and being welcoming? How is this working?
Okay, I will share about our internship program, because I did see some questions about funding that it didn't really get into. And I have to say, yeah, that is one of those like critical pieces that sometimes takes time to build, right? This program, again, it was actually through a grant from USDA, a fund for rural America. I don't know that there's I don't know if that exists anymore, but that was a way for us to start this program, and also funding from Bank of America. So one of our board members, and again, think about your board, one of our board members actually sat at, I believe it was one of those Bank of America CRA committees. And so they had that connection, and it did take time, relationship building, and to bring this idea up of why this was so important. Imagine 19 years ago talking about diversity. I mean, that was a really hard topic to talk about back then. I mean, it still is in some ways, but back then it was just like, why, right? So anyway, but it took years. But eventually Bank of America did provide some grant, seed money as well to continue the internship program. Now, 23 years later, we have proven that the model works, that we are able to bring right to diversify our field, to build leaders. And now we actually have gained funding partners through NeighborWorks America. It's a national organization intermediary that supports nonprofit housing developers. Rural LISC is also one of our funders. We have engaged with a couple of foundations as well over time, although foundations tend to come and go and you probably already know this, but we have been able to work with a couple foundations over the years, and also other banks like Wells Fargo. Who else do we had recently actually, because we also want to expand our reach and be able to work in tribal and with tribal entities, which is also a huge need, I think, in the entire country, right? One of the tribes in California is partnering with us and being able to provide some funding so that we can also expand our program to tribal entities in California. So again, it's been a work of love, work of continuing the program and being able to show that it works. And over time, we have been able to gain new partners and sustain the program all these years, because to be honest with you, it's fundraising. That's part of my role too. Fundraise every single year. And especially in the early years of the program, there were people that thought this is not going to survive. We're lucky if we even make it to like 3-5 years. But here we are, 23 years later, and it's because, again, we have been able to cultivate those relationships, and it takes time, unfortunately, sometimes.
Yeah, time and relationship building, right, are things that Chester, Gisela, as well as Calvin have all noted that are critical to doing this work in communities, in rural communities and communities of color in particular. We have another question that came through. It's really around, how do you capture the unique stories of people and place so that folks holding power in those places begin to see the value of those that are most creative and often marginalized. So how do you do that? Like, that's the how-to. And I know y'all have, answers of how you're seeing this in your communities. Chester?
Yeah, so for ABC2, we're very intentional about capturing our stories and telling our own stories our way and narrative. So one of the things with young people, they love social media, they love videography. So we have a camera and we actually record stories from individuals through the work that we do, but also just capture stories and put it in a video, and we share back out to our stakeholders and to the community. And that's the way to draw people to know that this is an organization that embraces different voices that are marginalized, but creating that power building within our organization through our own stories. Because so oftentimes in rural America, our stories are being told for us by people who do not have our lived experiences. And that becomes the true narrative and drive the work.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Calvin.
I think there are a couple of things I wanted to add real quickly, and actually linking this question with the last one as well. I think one of the things that I'm seeing that's encouraging in philanthropy as well is recognizing that, as Chester's talking about, there are a lot of ways to tell your own story. And so it's a challenge also for the philanthropic world in terms of funding, that why do we need a grant report that is on paper? If people are able to record that and do it in different ways, that I'm seeing the philanthropic world respond to recognize that there are a lot of different ways to kind of get information, and it doesn't have to be pen to paper or typing it out and these long reports that are hard for people to do. And there is value in getting the narratives in ways that people are more comfortable with anyway. And of course, sometimes there is value in kind of writing it out, but kind of thinking about that. I think the other thing I just wanted to get in real quickly is just this challenge of organizations, especially small organizations, and especially BIPOC leaders leading small organizations, that part of the issue is isolation, and that the way you find out about these funding opportunities and other things that are out there is to be part of larger initiatives, but they don't have the staff to do it. And so I think I just want to highlight that is an ongoing issue that I think is a challenge, is figuring out how does a Chester Williams, who does a really amazing work, or Gisela as well, and can attend community initiatives around food systems and youth development and other things and participate, but then get everything else done without like completely burning out? And I think that's something that the larger philanthropic system and nonprofit system in general has to figure out, particularly for BIPOC leaders.
Absolutely. Wise words. And I just saw in the chat, is it your birthday, Calvin? Happy birthday. Thank you for spending your birthday with us. Absolutely, we know that, time is a finite thing. And a lot of you all as leaders are doing this work every day. And it is wonderfully fulfilling, but you only have 24 hours in a day. And so how do you use the resources, the people, the connections, the relationships that you have been able to build to continue to build the power within your community? I just want to say thank you for all that you all do each and every day. Thank you for joining us today to share some of the tools and the practices that you've utilized with some success. So now we're going to we asked you to join us for breakout. So we're going to move to breakout sessions. All of our presenters and our presenters experts are going to be in a breakout room. You can see the link to the breakouts that Devin just put in the chat. We sent everybody that registered a link during this hour. So you can hop on over to the link that is in the chat to the breakout. If you didn't receive something, please send a note to the email address that's on the screen. Each session will include one of our speakers and presenters, as well as a facilitator. So it might take a couple minutes to get to the right room, but you can make sure to chat when you get there. So everybody, please, we ask that you join us on our Zoom that Devin put in the chat for our breakout rooms. Thank you for joining us for today's session. And the recording will also be available on our website.
Bonita, so we also panelists?
Yes, everybody joins that link. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.